we talk about the American public being asleep, absolutely. They have no idea the significance of Brics. They have no idea what makes a dollar the world reserve currency. They have no idea the lengths at which these countries, which, you know, amount to 2 of the 3 largest nuclear arsenals in the world, the majority, 80% of all of the oil that comes out of that is produced around the world, in particular in the Middle East and the Strait of Hormuz, is now under the Brics umbrella.
Today, we are fortunate to be joined by Andy Schechtman with Miles Franklin, the bullion dealer. We're going to talk about gold. We're going to talk about silver, some of the latest developments going on in the world. Andy, welcome to Ron's Basement.
Ron, it's good to be here. I appreciate it very much. I've been watching your basement, not really like a peeping Tom, I should say, but I've been watching from afar and a fan of what you're doing. And I'm glad that we were able to connect here. So thanks a lot for having me.
Well, it's our my pleasure, our pleasure, because I have a real solid group of subscribers to the channel. I like to refer to us as gold and silver and platinum enthusiasts. And on that note, a couple of them like to refer to you as the time traveler. Are you familiar with that at all?
Yeah, I am. What's his name?
Jake.
He's a wonderful guy. I met him.
Jake's Custom Parts.
Yeah, I met Jake. I sponsored Bix Weir's roadshow, and I met him in a bar while we did the show in Dallas, I believe, or Austin, forget, Dallas, I think. Anyways, he's really a really nice guy. He made me some shirts. They called me the time traveler. Look, what he's talking about is that I've done over 1,200 videos on topic of Brics, starting in late 2019. And I remember about a month after I started talking about this, my wife came up to me and said, Andy, you're saying the same damn thing over and over and over again. I said, but you don't understand, honey. No one is saying this. I'm the only one who's saying it. And it just, I know I'm right. It makes sense to me. I can see the pieces that are being put into place. There's this progression of events. And if you look, you can see, you don't even have to be very astute to see the crumbs that are being dropped at our feet. And it's something, look, I've been doing this for 33 years, Ron, and I've talked about a lot of things. As a company, we've talked about a lot of things. Most have come true. Never one within a grenade shot, anyway, of when we thought it would, because when you base your conclusions or your ideas and root them in economics and mathematics with a sprinkling of old school logic, chances are they're going to come true. But in a world that has so many variables injected into it day by day, and a ruling class that has the ability to suppress and manipulate and do things that are really not typically found in economics, at least in terms of its natural aspects, the outcome never happens when you think it will, typically, but usually you can't run from the mathematics of it, and it does over time. What's happened with the Brics and this growing group of countries has shocked me at how fast it's happened. I've talked about it at length, but never really thought we would see things accelerate to the degree that we have. So that's what Jake is talking about, and I appreciate it. It's honestly, more than it being a badge of honor that I got it right, at least up until now, it's more concerning to me because the things that I see and have talked about are accelerating, and the outcome really is something that I find to be particularly concerning in terms of what it means for this country, what it means for our standard of living, and just what it means for the dollar and everything that is associated with it. So yes, Jake, I love you, buddy. Thank you. And he seems to be on the circuit. He's on most of the channels, or he watches most of the channels that I have, I do shows on. And so he pops in and says that from time to time, but it's with great admiration and appreciation for him calling me that. So thank you, Jake. I appreciate it, buddy.
Yeah. So my question would be on the Brics. Are Americans asleep? Because it was interesting. We had the big announcement, 6 countries, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Iran, not Australia, Argentina, who else? Egypt and Ethiopia, six
Yeah.
countries. Now it's going to be over 50% of the world population. Are Americans asleep? Because the next morning I thought, I want to go see what CNN is saying about this. And when I opened up the CNN website, all I saw were articles about Donald Trump's mugshot. I thought this Brics could possibly be the biggest news that we've had, maybe of the decade, who knows, maybe, maybe of the century, but the mainstream media in the United States isn't even covering it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say shame on CNN. I think they've dropped the ball. There is no such thing as journalistic integrity any longer. There really is no investigative journalism. It's all just a bunch of crap that is sensationalizing what is really a denigration of the American justice system and the FBI. And that's part and parcel with, I think, a lot of what I've been talking about is that what's made this country wonderful, that being the rule of law, that it's equally applied to everyone, the justice system. I mean, people have walked through from Central America in 110-degree heat to find a better life for 1,000 miles. They've walked or tied together inner tubes with string and floated from Cuba to find a better life, to find law and order and justice equally applied to everyone. And this isn't about being Republican or Democrat. I am a libertarian. I think both parties suck. I think both parties have screwed the pooch in a very big way. And this is more about being patriotic. And yes, they are asleep at the switch, and they follow, even those that are well-read, they're reading the wrong things. They're following the wrong media, who is leading us down a road that is completely misguided from things that are happening. I mean, how many people really know that gold was reclassified tier 1 in April of 2019? Do you even know what that means out there? I mean, it's a riskless asset on par with US dollars, the only other tier 1 asset since 1944. How many people know about the Belt Road Initiative, the largest infrastructure project in human history that is comprising 75% of human population? And, you're talking Asia and Africa and South America and parts of Europe that are being connected by the Chinese in the most ambitious infrastructure project ever attempted, where they are building roads and bridges and maritime channels and oil refineries and gold and silver mines, and they are industrializing these parts of the world and helping them bring their commodities to market to industrialize their economies. And how many people understand that? How many people know that all of the OPEC countries are on the Belt Road Initiative? It's a very, very big deal that accounts for right now 50% of global GDP and 75% of human population. How many people know what makes the dollar the world reserve currency? They don't. I think most people don't. And this is all tied into your question. Of course, I'm answering it a little bit more roundabout way, but what does make the dollar the world reserve currency? Well, it's the full faith and credit of the US government, first and foremost. And their balance sheet just came out, Ron, a couple of weeks ago for 2022 that showed $155 trillion in debt. On top of the 32 trillion in that's on balance sheet, you have Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and government and military pensions, which are pretty darn close to 130 trillion off balance sheet. Our obligations are north of $155 trillion, and by their own admission, 5 trillion in assets.
If you're looking to buy gold, silver, or platinum, do yourself a favor and check out Pembex, the online precious metals bullion dealer and sponsor of Ron's Basement. I was a happy customer before they offered to support the channel. You'll find they have the best prices, quality, and service. I think Pembex is best, and you will too. And be sure to tell them that you're from Ron's Basement.
How many people know that the largest asset in this country is student debt, representing over 40% of the assets the U.S. government actually claims as an asset? The sweat of our children who are indebted to the tune of 40% of the government's assets. The land of the free, the home of the brave. That's what we have in terms of a balance sheet. We are 125% debt to GDP. We are a banana republic, but at least we don't jail our political oppositions the way that South American banana republics do. Well, at least not yet, anyway. And so when you talk about credit, we're insolvent and broke. When you talk about faith, well, we talked about that. Does anyone really believe, and all politics aside, please, this is not a political statement, but does anyone really believe that justice and is being applied equally to the current administration and the former. I think you have to really be lying to yourself if you said, yes, of course it is. No, it's not. And so these things are not lost on our foes. But that's the faith and the credit. So put a check mark there, probably not so good. How about the fact that what really makes the dollar, or the linchpin of the dollar hegemony, is the relationship with Saudi Arabia. In 1974, after 3 years earlier, we closed the gold window because de Gaulle from France was draining all the gold held at the treasury at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce. They closed the gold window, went back on our promise. Kissinger struck a deal 3 years later in 74 with the Saudi kingdom, said, hey, we'll protect you. Before that, you will denominate your oil through OPEC in dollars, and you'll recycle those dollars into our US treasuries. But we'll protect you, no one will ever mess with you. Good deal. Been that way for 50 years. So when you talk about the Brics, to only speak about the Brics and ignore the really important piece, and that Saudi Arabia is really only half the story. So in the last few years, the day we left Afghanistan in a very unharmonious way, Russia and Saudi Arabia announced a joint military cooperation agreement. That was the end of the dollar, or the petrodollar as we know it, or the beginning of it anyway. The day after that, Russia announced the same thing with Saudi Arabia, with Nigeria, rather. Two big OPEC producing countries, the biggest and one of the bigger ones. And when that happened, it became very obvious that, hey, what made the dollar, or gave the dollar its hegemony, was the protection of the Saudi kingdom. And now a country with hypersonic ICBMs is also protecting them. And that's when my eyes really started to open up about what Saudi Arabia was getting at. They have subsequently, after President Biden signed an executive order telling the world we are going green by 2030, 50% by 2050, 85%, an executive order, Saudis, hey, we're going green. Appreciate all the help that you've given us with energy, but now we're going a different direction. So subsequently, Saudi Arabia, after already signing a military agreement with Russia, they formally applied to Brics. They have joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or applied to it. And what that is, Ron, is the largest regional financial and military organization in the world. You're talking the Chinese army, and it's no small deal here that they have applied to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They've also joined the BRICS New Development Bank. They have also told all of the people of the world, when at the World Bank meeting in Davos, that they would indeed be willing to take other currencies for oil. But I thought it was the protection of the Saudi kingdom and the promise that they would only sell dollars in, or oil in dollars through OPEC, that made the dollar the world reserve, on top of the full faith and credit of the US government. You can see how things are starting to break apart. And so when we talk about the American public being asleep, absolutely. They have no idea the significance of Brics. They have no idea what makes a dollar the world reserve currency. They have no idea the lengths at which these countries, which, you know, amount to 2 of the 3 largest nuclear arsenals in the world, the majority, 80% of all of the oil that comes out of that is produced around the world, in particular in the Middle East and the Strait of Hormuz, is now under the Brics umbrella. And not only that, you have, you know, when you talk about what Russia brings to the table in terms of food and in terms of oil and natural gas, when you talk about Africa bringing to the table in terms of all of their mineable minerals and metals, when you talk about China, the engine of ingenuity and growth and military protection, when you talk about all of these countries coming together, striking deals outside the dollar, and you bring Saudi Arabia into the fold, it's really, really significant. And shame on CNN for not telling any of us any of this stuff. So yeah, the public has no idea what's coming. And I draw the analogy to, you know, for those of you who remember Randy Johnson, the baseball player, he's almost 7 feet tall, threw the ball about 100 miles an hour, played for the Seattle Mariners. And if you Google Randy Johnson hits a bird, you'll see he threw a pitch one time. He threw the ball so hard that a poor bird was flying by as he threw it to home plate, a pitch, and it exploded. Hit the bird, exploded. And my analogy would be, yes, the American public is in the batter's box against Randy Johnson, and they have a blindfold on. They have no idea what's coming at them, and so they can't get out of the way of what is coming. And what my mission has been for the past 4 years in the over 1,200 YouTube videos I've done on this topic is to pull the blindfold off, to let people know this is really significant. And if you've ever played the game of Jenga, where you pull a little piece out one by one by one by one, at what point does the Jenga tower topple? Now, we're not there yet, but you can see, and we can talk about what has happened recently, more and more and more. The term is called logarithmic decay. We're little by little by little by little by little, then all at once. You're on a river, you hear something in the horizon, you don't know what it is. Little by little, you're going down, 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 little by little by little by little, bang, you hit the falls, and off you go. Where are we on the graph of the logarithmic decay? Not really sure, but I will tell you that the Brics meeting is hugely significant, and the fact that the public is asleep is really a shame.
Yeah, I often say, I live in a upper middle class suburb in St. Louis, and we have a neighborhood swimming pool. There's like 400 homes here, so there's always people at the pool. And if somebody comes up and starts talking to me that I don't really care to talk to, I can start talking about silver and gold, and that'll usually get them to leave. If that doesn't work, I can talk about Brics. And if that doesn't work, then I can pull out the ultimate, which is talking about the petrodollar. Then their eyes roll. I mean, people just don't really care. And I've got and by the way, I have a Jenga board back there.
Yeah, it is. There it is. Yeah, I see it.
But I want to get your opinion on this, and it goes with what you were just saying.
Yeah.
When I think about the United States from, let's say, 1970 through 2020, okay, obviously we were taken off the gold standard, but in a lot of regards, America enjoyed a period of, I guess you could say, prosperity. Fake prosperity is one way to say it, but in terms of geopolitical power, financial power, it was a pretty good run of 50 years. And if you take out 2020 through today, roughly 3 years, and you look at where we're positioned now, and you look at the financial condition of the country, which you touched on, you look at the political situation in our country, which we didn't really touch on, but I think we both know that's pretty atrocious. And you look at the geopolitical. I'm thinking if those 50 years were the best of times to a certain regard, and we know what happened to the dollar, the value of the dollar during that period, what do the next 50 years look like, given the current set of circumstances in which we find ourselves?
Well, I find it's a very good question, and I agree completely. And I mean, I don't know if it's really a question as much as it is a statement, but I think it's interesting when you look at who is leading the country. The number one economic advisor to the United States government right now, to the Biden administration, is a man named Jared Bernstein, and his whole thesis is to the dollar to shed its world reserve standard, that the privilege of being world reserve is something that the United States can no longer afford in terms of its imbalances and in terms of trade imbalances and the distortions it creates. And when you talk about just what would you do to lose the world reserve standard? Well, the first thing I would do would be to weaponize the dollar, to weaponize the Forex reserves against Russia, to not only impose sanctions, but to outright confiscate their money, which we did, and openly tell them we are using it to rebuild the Ukraine. The next thing I would do is I would tell the Saudis, hey, thanks for everything. We know that really, because you value oil globally through OPEC in dollars, that's what makes us really the petrodollar. It gives us the hegemony that we have enjoyed for 50 years. And so we don't need it anymore. We are doing all that we can to push and lose the world reserve stats and push the world away from us. And is it by coincidence, or is it just plain stupidity to not realize the consequences we make from weaponizing the world reserve currency? When you are the administrator of the world reserve currency, Ron, it should not be up to us to tell people who can and can't use it. It should be for world opinion, if anything at all. But the point of it is that, yeah, we are incentivizing de-dollarization. We are incentivizing countries to find a back door to it. And when you talk about what's happening here, in the country, I think it all goes part and parcel. I mean, we live I grew up at a time, where my parents were hippies, literally in the 70s. I mean, I grew up whether it was sex, drugs, and rock and roll, whatever the hell you wanted to do back then, you respect people. You don't have to celebrate them. But this country's obsession with things that need to be celebrated now, cancel culture and censorship and transgenderism and all of these things, that if you were just respectful of other people's lifestyles, it would be great. Now we have to embrace and celebrate them. And it is fraying things or the fabric of this country. We're not unified anymore, whether it's black and white or red and blue or vax and no vax or rich and poor. I mean, you have an environment where we are now classified or identified by whom we voted for in the last election. So you put all of this stuff together on top of what we said earlier. I mean, is the Justice Department being weaponized? Is the law being administered equally, the justice system? And these things are not lost on the rest of the world. So you see a mismanagement of the world reserve currency. You see weaponizing of the dollar. You see pushing away of the Saudis, the linchpin of the dollar hegemony. And you see massive break in unity in the United States. You see political issues. You see geopolitical issues. You see financial issues, economic issues. You see distortions that were created in this country through 4 years of printing more money than in the history of the country preceding it, while at the same time distorting interest rates, stepping on them, which created massive distortions in asset prices. It's the perfect storm. I mean, is it the Klaus Schwab moment when Saudi Arabia and the rest of OPEC dump dollars, say we're not going to take them any longer? For oil, we're going to take whatever they decide, whatever it is, a new Brics settlement currency or the yuan, which coincidentally is immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. Whatever they do, if they say we're not just taking dollars anymore, that's a seminal moment where the world is confronted with, do we dump dollars now all at once or slowly? Whatever it is, that moment when the world sheds dollars because the synthetic demand created over the last 50 years of having to own dollars to buy oil is now something that is slipping away from us. And was it intentional or not? I don't know. But when you have 155 trillion in debt and you take out student debt out of the asset base, you have 3.5 trillion in assets, most of which is military and land. And after that, you're broke, you're insolvent, you're a banana republic by traditional measurements. And what is happening inside the country, it has to be making much of the world saying, what the hell is happening in the United States? Have they lost their mind? And less about the mismanagement of the dollar and the weaponizing of it throughout the world, but more upon the way we are being, I think, viewed on the world stage. It all goes together. Now, is that exactly what Jared Bernstein wants? Don't know. Maybe it's just a pure coincidence. But all I'm saying is the #1 economic advisor to this country advocates for losing the world reserve status. Coincidentally, it's interesting that the #2 economic advisor, Lael Brainerd, is a modern monetary theorist who wants to have money be administered directly to and from the central bank to cull all of the regional banks. Do you see what's happening there with the reverse repo market allowing the money markets to invest in it and the commercial banks, and all this money going to the safety of the too big to fail banks earning 5.5% with daily liquidity? I mean, you couldn't draw it up any better to lose the world reserve status and to watch the banks collapse. And this just happens to be #1 and 2 economic advisors in this country, their platform. Now, in terms of are the people missing this and what's going to happen? I believe you will see, yes, the people are missing it, have no clue. And I think you will see a continuing de-dollarization, again, using logarithmic decay, little by little by little by little, then all at once. And the reason it's not all at once right now is that a lot of these countries have too much in the way of assets still in dollars. A lot of debt is still in dollars. It needs to be repaid in dollars, and they don't want to cut off their nose to spite their face. But what I will tell you is that the Brics meeting that we just saw, August 22nd through the 5th or whatnot, 26th, is the beginning of the end of the dollar as the singular world reserve currency. The fact that Saudi Arabia has joined and formally joined Brics, applied to the belt or is on the belt road with the rest of the OPEC countries, applied to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the New Development Bank, is striking deals with all of these countries to pay for things outside the dollar. It's a massive deal. And I just want to give you one of the things that they're doing right now in terms of what these countries are doing in terms of trading outside the dollar and in terms of choosing sides. Now, I know you didn't ask me this question, and I don't want to get too far ahead of you, but I'm going to give you two things that will hopefully underscore or put an exclamation point at what I'm talking about. Remember France? They were right there with us in 2022 when we put sanctions on Russia. Well, Macron, the president of France, just came out with some statements. Now, before he did the statements a few months ago, he did a very large liquid natural gas deal with the United Arab Emirates, paid for it in yuan instead of in dollars, as they always would have settled. He did a 50-point trade agreement with China and Xi Jinping. He went to visit him, signed a 50-point agreement ranging from 5G technology to military engagement. Sides are being chosen, but I want to read to you something that he just said yesterday or the day before. He says, the world order is changing with the situation getting tougher and more complicated, which runs the risk of weakening the West and Europe in particular. He stressed the need to avoid partitioning the world over the Ukraine war at a time when many countries from the global South, that being the Brics, have refused to condemn Russian aggression. We must avoid a narrative that claims this is Europe's war. It doesn't concern us, he said. Wow, really? And then lastly, he said, France also seeks to be a trusted partner on the geopolitical front. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean outside the G7? Does that mean, he asked to be brought into the BRICS meeting, they turned him down, but is what he's saying, is this like BRICS Tinder for the central banks? I don't know. All I'm simply saying is, why is he publicly saying this? And just to give you one more idea of how this is all happening, a Chinese firm just signed a huge contract with Iran for $2.7 billion to modernize their largest airport, right? Okay, no big deal, right? China doing a deal with Iran, okay. Well, listen to how they're going to pay for it. The company has been selected to carry out the project after intensive negotiations with several domestic and international contractors. However, Iran will pay for the project using a barter mechanism that allows swapping crude oil for financial services, financial resources, equipment, and technical services. So, really, barter system. What is the common denominator here? Striking unilateral deals outside the US dollar, and little by little by little by little by little, the erosion of settlement in dollars will dramatically impact the reserve status of the dollar. So yes, this is a very big deal, and it is accelerating. And I could give you 5 or 6 more of these to back up again what I'm saying. But to your point, without monopolizing all of the time, Ron, yeah, it's a huge deal. But the people in this country suffer from, immediate gratification not being fast enough. And, that's what happens when you create all of this money and keep interest rates low, where asset prices go to the moon in a matter of no time. And they're distorted. So people believe their house is supposed to go up to a double in a year, or their stock portfolio is up 2 or 3 times in a year or two, or 5x on a cryptocurrency in 6 months. That's not how markets work. And it's the distortions created by mismanagement of the reserve currency, both fiscally and monetarily, and the policies of the Fed and the government have distorted everything. So yes, this is coming. And the worst part about it is that people like you and I, and to your point, why do I not talk to people outside of YouTube? I mean, I do if they ask me, but I'm very quiet about it for the exact reason that you said at the pool. Because the message we bring is the antithesis of what a broker would bring. A broker would be, we make you millions of dollars and take care of your retirement. You live happily ever after. We say the opposite of that. If you don't protect your ass, your retirement's gone and you will not live happily ever after. So everyone says, oh God, here's the buzzkill again. So you don't bring it up unless I don't anyway, unless I am fully asked, because people would rather be blissfully ignorant until it's too late, I guess. But sorry for being so long.
No, that you
require justification.
You're great information, and it feels that way. Like we're living in a fantasy world in this country. If you look at that 50-year period again from 1970 through today, 53-year period, like we have dumped like things that have existed for thousands of years, a nuclear family, all types of like we're living in this fantasy weird world, and up to and including the fact that during that 50-year period, we also dumped the gold standard. And I have to wonder, as you were talking about everything going on, and how do gold and silver and precious metals fit into that as wealth preservation, wealth protection? And I want to ask you this question because I've posed this several times lately. Sure, Nixon took us off the gold standard in 1971, officially or temporarily took us off the gold standard, but has the world as a whole ever really gone off the gold standard? Does that question make any sense? Like, I
Well, I
have this.
mean, yes, there is no such thing as a gold standard any longer. When you talk about has the world gone off the gold standard, I mean, well, to me, the gold standard, let's define what it was. At the end of World War II, when the dollar took over from the pound sterling, we said to the world, not to the people of the world, but to the governments of the world, that, all right, here's the deal. We're going to be the world reserve currency, and you all peg your local currencies to the US dollar. And anytime that you would like to exchange your dollars into gold, we will offer it back to you at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce. Therefore, the dollar was as good as gold. It was pegged to gold at a fixed rate. Another way of saying that is that, we could only print as much money as we had backing the ability to deliver gold at 35 bucks an ounce. It was President de Gaulle from France who realized that we were abusing that and not being truthful, because we were printing more dollars and issuing more treasuries to fund the Vietnam War, the guns and butter thing, and to fund the Vietnam War, then we had gold behind it. So he sent warships to New York Harbor filled with dollars and said, give us back our gold. So we closed the gold window. A better way, I think, of answering that would be that the central banks of the world, the majority of them, have always understood what gold is, or at least most of them. And it is wealth. It is money. The currency that we carry, a lot of people call it money, it's currency. But when you talk about the way that the most powerful, influential people in the world look at gold, I think, honestly, they look at it as money and as wealth, and as the antithesis to the Western fiat system. That's why they've obliterated it from the vernacular. They've taken it out of the banks, they've taken it out of the money, and they've taken it out of the way that people understand what money is. And so, yeah, for a lot of us, we don't know what the gold standard is, but for the central banks, they've never lost sight of what gold truly is.
For the Western central banks, but would you say that if you look at the Eastern countries, the Brics countries, China, that it's a different story? That they look at it, and let me pose you one more question. Could the United States, how do I say, I'm trying to see if I can convey this verbally, could we almost be, could the country at some point, if things, get worse and worse and worse, be forced to re-recognize, maybe not officially, but be forced, if the rest of the world is valuing gold at a much different way than we are, and they have all the power, could the United States indirectly be forced to, I won't say go back on the gold standard officially, but maybe, does that make sense unofficially?
It does, and it actually makes more sense than you think. So the head of the International Monetary Fund is a lady named Kristalina Georgieva. And it's interesting, by the way, she's on her way to visit China right now, after China just came out and said that they want to challenge the global financial narrative, that they want to move away from the dollar as being the sole settlement currency of the world. And now all of a sudden the IMF, the head of the IMF, is on her way to visit. I find it to be interesting timing. But she, if you realize the IMF is a Western friendly organization, roughly 150 countries, that was founded at Bretton Woods. About 7-8 months ago, they came out with a report, and the title is something to the extent of "Gold as an International Reserve Currency, comma, a barbarous relic no more, question mark." They are understanding what gold really means. And then Kristalina Georgieva just came out after all of the talk of the central bank digital currency. And remember, the Bank of International Settlements, the most powerful bank on the planet, the central bank or central bank, they're the ones that reclassified gold tier 1. They're also the ones that have said to the world that you all have to have a functional CBDC, central bank digital currency, by 2025. If you take the entire gross domestic product of the world, all of it, and all of the countries that make it up, 95% of the gross domestic product and the countries that make up that 95% all have in production or in development a new central bank digital currency. It is coming. And what Kristalina Georgieva just said a couple of weeks ago publicly was that a central bank digital currency that is not pegged to something is fiat. What have the central banks been doing more so than at any time in history over the last 15 months? Buying gold. More than at any time in history, they have been buying gold, and they've all been repatriating it from the exchanges like the LBMA, the London Bullion Market Association, or the Metals Association, or the COMEX market, or backdooring it out of the ETFs. They are removing it from the New York Fed and the Bank of England. These countries, these sovereign governments are repatriating their gold. They are accumulating more of it and silver, because I think they understand that the only way when the music stops and you reset the system and you start over, it's like, it's like you catch your girlfriend cheating on you and she, and 5 times, and she finally says, I won't do it anymore. Well, at some point you don't believe her any longer. Well, that's kind of what the whole system is, right? The system is lacking trust. And in order for this new monetary system to have trustworthiness, it needs to be pegged to something. And to me, remember, President de Gaulle proved that convertible currencies convert. He came over there and said, give us the gold. I think a marriage between blockchain technology and physical gold, held very, very transparently and having it audited, would be enough to issue a new world reserve currency or a new standard that has trust, verifiable, immutable trust, that doesn't have to be convertible. And if you do it the right way. So yeah, I think ultimately that's what the West will be forced to do. Whether they beat the Brics to the punch, don't know. But I do think that any new system, in order to gain that trust, has to be pegged to something. And there is nothing better than what the Bank of International Settlements calls Tier 1, other than US dollars and treasuries. It's the only one. It makes perfect sense. So yeah, I think it's a good question, and it'll probably happen at some point. Don't know when, because otherwise a central bank digital currency backed by nothing except the government's ability to print more. Like, remember, what is modern monetary theory? Print your way into prosperity. It's monopoly money. You do that, you have no trust anywhere. And what is really the value of that? So yeah, I think that they would have to go back to something, not make it redeemable, and marry the technology of blockchain with gold and inject transparency, and you are on to something at that point.
Yeah, I mean, and I've heard you say this several times, like, they aren't going to telegraph to us what's going on, right? You have to look at the crumbs, the clues, and put them together. And when you look at the central banks buying gold, more gold now than they bought during many of the years when we were on the gold standard. You look at the reclassification of gold, it sends a pretty clear message to me. And I agree with you 100% that some type of gold tethered, gold backed currency, if it's regulated, if it's audited, if it's transparent, could be a great thing for the world, in general. It really could. I don't think,
if you do it the right way, you don't have to go 1-to-1. Now, it's interesting. Right. James Rickards, I had a conversation with him not too long ago at a conference, and had a couple of drinks and picked his brain. He says this is a guy that was hired by the CIA to run simulated financial war games to how can the world blow up the US without bombs financially, in other words. And his comment to me was that if he were the Brics, and he thinks this is what they'll do, they will make every brick, let's call it same as a dollar, I don't know what they'll call it, let's call it a brick, will be valued at 1 ounce of gold, period. Mm-hmm. And he says the West will destroy themselves and the Brics don't have to do anything. I said, what do you mean, Jim? He says, well, if the West have to continue to inflate, now look, we have 155 trillion in debt. Ron, a trillion seconds ago was 31,688 years ago. It's beyond comprehension how big a trillion is. So we have this massive debt, and most of it, is owed to the American public: Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, government, military pensions. If we have to inflate, which we will, to pay all of these obligations, then the dollar goes down, gold goes up, the Brics win. if the US tries to buy a whole bunch of gold to compete, the dollar goes down, gold goes up, the Brics win. Now, I don't know what they're going to do and how they're going to peg it, but I think that if you wanted to still be able to do monetary policy where you're not beholden completely to one-to-one ratio, the way that I think a lot of people visualize it, what if you just had 20% of every new currency unit, new dollar, new brick, whatever, pegged to gold, with the immutability and the veracity shown on a distributed ledger, having it very transparent, having it audited by independent auditors. So now you still have room to create money a little bit, and you have to maintain at least a 10 or 20% peg, but it gives you some latitude to enact monetary policy. You're not completely beholden to a one-to-one ratio. But I'm just simply saying, even if it's fractional, if it's something, if it's anything that shows that governments will be reined in from what they've done there forever, since Roman times. They will choose inflation over austerity. Coincidentally, that's why you have ridges on the coins, because way back when the Roman government, when they're running out of money, they would trim the edges of the coins to pay their soldiers, and the coins would be just a little bit smaller in diameter. You do that with all the coins, you got enough to make a whole bunch more. Well, that's why they have ridges on coins, so you can see if that was messed with. So anyways, the point of it is that all governments choose inflation over the tough decisions. They want, they don't want to be dragged out of the castle like Marie Antoinette was. So I think that, if either system wants to be credible, they must have it pegged to something, west or east.
Yeah, and I like the word also, tethered. And I thought of that as you were describing how, if the new currency or money is tethered to gold, I think of like an anchor, on the bottom of the ocean, and sure, things can float around a little bit, but it can't get away too far.
Right.
There can be some wiggle room and some play, but not like we've had here in the United States over the last 50 years, like a castaway ship that just goes off into wherever it needs to.
Right.
Andy, thank you so much. This has been great. We didn't even talk about the Fed too much, so maybe next time we can we can talk about the Fed. I mean, I guess we did talk about the Federal Reserve indirectly because their policies have created much of the situation that we talked about. But it's a fascinating time. I go back to the most recent visit when Xi and Putin were together, and when they left, they shook hands and said, "We're living through one of the most profound periods of change, and we're at the helm of what's going on." I think it's going to be an interesting. I don't think it's going to be the next 50 years. It feels like to me it could be the next 5 or 10 years. Things could develop really quickly. I know I am, and the people that are joining us on this interview right now are advocates of silver and gold. Do you like that concept of people being their own central bank? And obviously precious metals are a way to protect ourselves during times of uncertainty, because I like to say, gold and silver have seen this show. It's new to us what's going on, but silver and gold over the last thousands of years have seen similar type situations unfold. Is that a safe statement?
Through 2 world wars, German hyperinflation, the Great Depression, and every pandemic and everything the world's ever thrown at it. You're right. And it is still immutable wealth that the central banks, all of them, own some gold. They view it as money. And to your point about Xi Jinping and Putin living in interesting times, remember, that is a Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. And indeed, these are very, very interesting. I prefer dull and complacent. I prefer life before cell phones and computers, but it is what it is. It's going to accelerate. It is accelerating. It's going faster and faster and faster. And one of the things about gold and silver, being your own central bank, being your own annuity, being your own retirement account, gold and silver are the only real assets, not only that have lasted the test of time through everything the world has thrown at it, but are also, simultaneously not someone else's liability in a world where counterparty risk is growing and growing and growing, and the systemic nature of everyone being tied together is worse. Yeah, I'd love to come back on with you and pick up where we left off. I think it's great. I'm a fan of what you're doing, and I'd be honored for the invitation. So you won't have to twist my arm or ask twice. Just say the word, I'll be back. Pick up where we left off.
That's the best news I've had all day, and I know that my subscribers and viewers were very excited to hear from you. So thank you. If they want to learn more about you, do they go to the Miles Franklin website? What's the best way to?
MilesFranklin.com, and the website is still a work in progress. You are able to purchase if you're in one of the states that don't have tax issues, like Florida, where I live. You know, we do a ton of business, but they have a law that says if it's under $2,000, you have to be taxed. Well, we are now implementing the tax software into our website. So some of the states we can't deliver to off the website. You can always email us at info@milesfranklin.com. Ask for a different price list, the one that's probably a lot more competitive, and it's for orders over $10,000. Ask us for that. Ask any questions. Ask to be talked to or spoken to, rather. If you have any questions on IRAs or any questions whatsoever, my brokers, 14 of them, almost every one of them, I would tell you, are my best of friends for most of my life. These are people that I would consider brothers and sisters that I literally have known since Little League. Some of them are a little newer in terms of my relationships, but the common denominator, they're all my personal friends. Several have been on Wall Street. One has a master's degree in business from Temple University after a degree from Wharton. We're all very well qualified to answer your questions and not be order takers, and to talk to you about economics and geopolitical events and the changes that we find ourselves in that is making this interesting times, the Chinese curse. So it would also be nice if they put "saw you on Ron's basement" or "Ron sent me" or whatnot. And it would be good to make sure that we treat your listeners exquisitely well. This is our first time here, and we'd love to know where they came from. But yeah, please do not feel obligated to place an order by sending us an email at info@milesfranklin.com. Ask for the price list, ask any questions, and you will be followed up with promptly if that's your wish.
Yep. And absolutely, Miles Franklin has a well-deserved sterling reputation, pardon the pun, but you know, I hear great things about you, and we'll look forward to talking to you next time, Andy. Thank you so much.
You got it, brother. I look forward to it as well. Thanks, Ron.